Does this need to be addressed now or can it wait?
If, like you said, you're going to double down, you're only digging a hole for yourself.
Why am I doing this work? Is it for me? Is it so I can get promoted? Or is it because I want to serve others, right? Serve my family and serve my coworkers.
Welcome to Forge the Man. Professional excellence meet vocational clarity. Through the intercession of Mary, Mother of fairest love, we help Catholic men sanctify their work and find their mission. The forge is hot and the hammer is ready. Let's get to work. Today we'll be joined by Joel Ojeda. He is a chief operating officer for an infrastructure consulting company. Joel is responsible for delivering on the region's ambitious growth goals and driving collaboration across the organization. Since joining, he has helped scale the company from approximately 1,000 employees to more than 6,500 employees through acquisitions and organic expansion. Joel earned a BS in industrial engineering with honors from the University of Southern California and an MBA from Yale School of Management. He lives in Orange County, California, with his wife and 2 young children and a third on the way. Joel, welcome.
Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here.
Well, Joel, why don't you fill in some of the gaps and maybe some of the stuff that I missed on your introduction?
Paul, I think the introduction was pretty generous and capture most of my background, but I think something that's kind of missing is some of the things I do on the side. So one of my proudest projects I'm working on right now is my wife and a couple other couples started a new school in Orange County called the Camino School. This is a school for K-8 classical education. And we're just, putting our business skill sets to work, not just for my own job, but also a way to serve the community. So just really excited about that project. It's been going on for a couple years. We're about to start our 3rd school year and just really, really excited about that. On the professional front, it's been working with Trillin as a chief operating officer for the West region. It's been a very fun ride. The role has evolved from when I first started, where we were I was one of the earlier employees as part of this holding company. And we've moved from the startup phase to a place of more of a stability right now. So my role has evolved, and I learned a lot of lessons on the way. I've been moving from being an individual contributor in my early phase in this company's journey to being more of an executive, and I've been learning a lot on the way. And I'm looking forward to sharing some of those learnings.
Joel, one of the first questions I have for you is that you have a lot of employees under you. What are some of the qualities and traits that you like to see from your subordinates?
Great question, Paul. So in my current role as a manager of managers, I think there's 2 types of employees that I look like. Those who are reporting directly to me and those who are part of the rest of the team, right? And for those who report to me, which is the ones I interface the most with and work alongside, I think there's a few qualities that I look for. One is their ability to lead, right? A lot of these employees are leading big groups. Are they able to lead and influence the organization? Are they servant leaders? Are they taking the team on their back? Are they leading by example? Are they the leaders that are going to influence other people? And third, the willingness to be docile and to take coaching. These are amazing experts who are very successful in their own right. But as part of belonging to a big organization, we set goals, very ambitious goals, and we provide coaching, right? And are they willing to take some direction? For the most part, most of these folks are pretty successful, are willing to do it, but there's always situations where it's a little bit of a give and take.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like what you're looking for is a person that's docile, that's willing to take direction. Even though they may have graduated from a good school or come from a big company, the bottom line is, will they take your direction and will they be a good team member? Almost like a good athlete on a team, good team member. Everyone is dealing with phone calls and texts and interruptions, and I'm sure you as an executive probably get pounded. But how do you stay on task and not let these distractions pull you away?
Yeah, great question, Paul. I'll be honest, I still struggle with it, and it's a struggle every day. Right. As you know, there's a lot of technology to kind of get in touch with anybody. You have your phone, your texting, email, you have Teams chat. And it's just, it's hard to find some downtime to really do some deep thinking. And at the same time, in my role, I'm constantly fighting fires. So it's always people looking for my attention. And so it's a few things that I found useful in how to kind of organize my day. One is putting my phone, to be honest, on silent. Right. And putting it away where only certain calls can go through. The calls from my supervisor, the calls from my wife, because you never know at work if there's something coming through, and just focus on making email and my team chats my main form of communication. When I do that, that kind of takes away some of the noise. I can control it a little bit more because it's more on my own pace, right? It's not something urgent. The second thing I do is put blocks in my calendar. I'm very protective of my time just because there's only a few hours in a day and there's more work to be done. And that's something I learned probably in the last couple of years because before that, I would just let my calendar get filled with meetings and back to back, and I wouldn't be able to make traction on my own work. And so just by protecting that time, by adding those calendar holds, it just helps protect the time. And then the third thing I also realize is not everything that's urgent for somebody else should be urgent for myself. So I actually have a little sticker in my computer that always says like, does this need to be addressed now or can it wait? And for a lot of things, they actually can wait. There's not that type of emergency where, it's life or death. So I can wait and continue going on my day with the priorities established for that day. With that said, you start off the day thinking you're accomplished certain things, but as the day progresses, things shift. And so you also have to be agile and be able to adapt. Right. And, something I just kind of thought about right now, another habit that I like to do to kind of help me with a prioritization, because ultimately the question about, distractions is about a prioritization, is I like to end my days when possible by just taking notes in my notepad. I have a handy notepad that I use, and I just write down what are the top things I need to focus on the next day. And so when I start work the next day, I open at that list. I take a quick glance at the email that came through overnight and then rank, what's my number one task? What's my number two task? Usually I have a list of, 10 tasks, and most of the time I can only get to one to the three just because of everything else going on. But those are just some little nuggets that I use to just help me prioritize because there's more than enough work. There's enough people that I need to talk to that demand my attention. And I just need these little tricks that just help with that prioritization.
Yeah, when you were speaking about the phone, when you go out in public or you're out and about and you see so many people attached to the phone, and I think that's something that all of us probably struggle with to some degree, but we need to learn to not let that phone control us. And it's obvious struggle that we should all really reflect on. I think the second thing you said was really good is to make a list of things to do, and as the day goes by, make adjustments. And I think if you don't write it down and you think you're going to remember it, you're probably not. It's a great advice. Now, how do you manage disagreements between some of your team members or conflicts that might arise? Because I think in every work environment, there's going to be a disagreement or maybe tension that rises.
No, another great question, Paul. A lot of times it depends on the type of disagreement, right? Whether it's a strategy, the disagreement, or a decision, or sometimes there's tension because two people just didn't get along, right? And so in the first one where it's a question about strategy or decision making, usually, I try to lean on the data, right? And be pre-analytical because I think most people are reasonable. And once they get certain data that tells you a certain outcome, most people end up in the same conclusion. And so leaning in on data is neutral, um, definitely helps with that decision making and taking away some of the tension. However, you can always overdo it in terms of the data analysis. So at a certain point, you kind of have to call it a day and just make a decision based on what you know and what you have in front of you. And so the first thing with those types of strategic decisions is trying to get the data. But then the second thing around that is just trying to have a conversation and trying to hear everybody out, right? But eventually, I think, somebody, either it's going to be me or my boss or whoever's in charge will have to make the decision, right? They're the ultimately the person who has not just the authority, but is going to be responsible for living with that decision. And so that's something I've been learning as I grow into my executive role, is leaning in on the authority. It's actually the feedback that I've been getting from my boss and my executive coach. Being younger, and sometimes there's people who are older, I struggle to kind of say, hey, I'm the COO of the region. I get to make the call. And so that's been something I've been kind of practicing. And so that takes care of the first one, which is, strategy, disagreement, or decisions. The second one, which is more around personality, right? And people not getting along. I'll be honest, those are a lot tougher to resolve, right? Because data itself is not going to resolve that. I know sometimes you can get into this vicious cycle of he said, she said, and it just becomes very hard to navigate. I tend to see two things as results, two things. One is kind of spending time individually with each of these people instead of having them all in the room, kind of calling a timeout. And just me as a supervisor, kind of spending time with each one of them to kind of get the side of the story, make them be heard, and then kind of make an assessment. But a lot of times, if it's already been something that's happened for a while, it's just really hard to undo it. It's more about focusing on the going forward. And so a message I usually give to people on my team is, look, if there's a bad behavior you don't like, next time it happens, please escalate it, right? So that we can nip it in the bud right away. A lot of times the issues is that you let it linger. And then the second thing too that tends to help with these personality tensions is just in-person team building. In this very virtual environment, people are always dealing with each other, on Teams or on virtual format. And sometimes you lose some of the communication, right? So I've been trying to make investments in bringing the team together, especially because I have teammates that are, spread across the US, and just really spending that time, not just to resolve problems, but get to know each other, right? Those are before, when we were going into offices or people were all co-located in the same office, it was just easier to do a little bit of the water chat, or what do you call the cooler water chat, and now it's a lot difficult in this virtual environment. So, to kind of summarize, like in person, and then just spending time individual with each person so they feel they're heard, and just kind of setting the tone that, next time just please raise this and don't let this get out of hand.
Yeah, Joel, I know you. So probably some of the things that you didn't say, but you probably would include is like, first of all, you're modeling how people should behave in the workplace, while we refrain from being critical or participating in topics that are not important. And then also maybe, hey, quick to say you're sorry if you messed up. And then the other thing is to try to create a bright and cheerful environment. And I think the leader, I mean, that's going to be on his shoulders, and I'm sure that's what you do. And then you mentioned also like gathering the facts, listening to both sides, and then suits, you got to make a call. Someone, in fact, may be wrong. I know today it seems like a lot of leadership is afraid to make that call. But if someone definitely crossed the line of behavior, they have to be corrected. Because if you don't
Yeah,
fix it, then you're going to create a morale problem.
absolutely. And everybody sees that, right?
Yeah. We all make mistakes, but what do you do when you fail professionally? How do you fix it, and how do you move on without letting it affect you?
Yeah, so I make mistakes all the time. There's big mistakes and there's small mistakes, right? Small mistakes, like little typos and things like that. I'll be honest, before I used to let them bother me, right? Because I was a little bit of a perfectionist, but just kind of let that go. In terms of, bigger mistakes, you kind of alluded to before, you just own it. And you admit it, and you apologize, right? Sometimes it's, on the next call. Sometimes you give somebody a call. Sometimes in an email, right? You try to rectify it as soon as possible. And I notice that sets the tone and it opens it up for other people too, to kind of admit, that they made a mistake. A lot of the mistakes usually made are just because they didn't have the complete picture, right? And so just also being a little reflective and acknowledging why you made the mistake, whether it was incomplete data, was it, having a bad day, whatever that might be, it makes a huge difference, right? I think that the worst thing that you see sometimes is when people try to cover it, right? And just ignore it or move on. It makes you not trust that person as much. It makes you be on guard. And if you do want to create a very positive environment, you need to be in a place where people are okay, feeling okay to not just apologize, but to fail, right? Because if not, people are just going to be covering their tracks, and that's not what we want, right? We want people to learn from their mistakes and take a risk, right? And with some risk, that comes failure.
Yeah, I think sometimes leadership thinks they have to be perfect because they're at the top, but I think if you were to do something like an error and admit it, I think sometimes the subordinates really look favorably on it because they're saying, hey, he's admitting he made a mistake, he's apologizing. I think that's very healthy for the work environment. Because I sometimes think we look in society, we see some leadership actually flat out make a mistake and they will like stand in that lie
And
in a
double
sense.
down.
Yeah, double down, and everybody knows that person is wrong, but I think that's something our Christian faith teaches us. When you do something wrong, be humble and admit that you're wrong.
Yeah, and I think it also helps signal to other folks that you have a certain value system. In my case, being Catholic and trying to be serious about our faith, I think people notice, when you're one of the people who is willing to kind of admit that, about your mistakes, or one of the people who's willing to always tell the truth, right? I know sometimes it's hard, right? Because you don't want to look bad. So it's easy to, spin it a little, right? And I don't know. I think those are just small mistakes that we make that over time kind of build up and impact the perception that others have of you. And so it's hard. I'm also tempted sometimes to like do a little bit of a spin on certain things. But ultimately, I think at the end, it pays off. You're creating the right culture, but you're also setting the tone for other folks.
Yeah, I think that's really needed in the workplace is for people to own up to their mistakes and not try to give the facade that you're perfect because nobody is. Nobody's perfect. We all make mistakes. And I think at the end you will get more respect because people know they can trust you too. That if Joel or Paul makes a mistake. I know at work sometimes when I would make a mistake, you could see it in the eyes of the people around you. They're not dumb. They pick it up pretty quickly. And if, like you said, you're gonna double down, you're only digging a hole for yourself. How important, Joel, is it networking for some of our audience? Like, what value to put on networking with others? And also, do you have mentors? I mean, you're an executive now, you're at the top. Do you have a mentor?
Yeah, Paul, I think, networking is extremely important, right? It's really going to open doors or close doors, right? Depending on who you know. For me, the importance of networking got really highlighted really, really early on in my career. And when I'm talking about networking, I'm not talking about just a superficial early phase of relationship building where you reach out to somebody and get to know somebody a little bit. I'm talking about really working with somebody and making an impression, right? Because somebody's not going to go to bat for somebody who they just barely know in the superficial. And I think a lot of times people make that mistake of the network being who you know, but it's more than that. It's who you know to a certain degree. To kind of give an example early in my career where I saw the value of networking was in my first job in consulting. I had been at my current job for about a year, and things were going well. I think I was doing things well. I was learning a lot, but I was feeling that I was gonna be doing the same type of project year in and year out. And so I found out that there was a director in another office that had some interesting projects, right? And I had introduced myself to him in the past, but definitely didn't get much traction. And so the next opportunity I had to spend some more meaningful time with him, which was a training in person, I intentionally sat next to him, right? And so doing the training, I made conversation with him. I kind of worked with him on a few things, and I think he came away with a positive interaction. And so after a few days of the training, I asked him, hey, keep me in mind for your next gig. Would love to definitely be on your team. And so he gave me a shot. Like a couple months after that, he gave me a little easier project to see if I could perform. And I delivered on that. And eventually he started wanting me for all of his projects, right? And I would say that was the biggest game changer during my time at that firm. He was working on probably some of the coolest projects in our group. He definitely gave me more responsibility early on in my career. And if I hadn't sat down next to him intentionally and just kind of waited, it wouldn't happen, right? So that was super important. But then I'll tell you, eventually he was the person who ended up writing my letter of recommendation for business school, and which kind of set me on my current journey. But I'll tell you a time where I didn't do the networking the right way. This was actually after business school. I was looking for a new job. And instead of trying to lean on people I knew or get to know people a little bit better, I was trying to microwave my network per se, right? I was kind of reaching out to people and just trying to cause a good impression and see if they would offer me a job. And of course, that didn't work, right? Eventually, I ended up getting my next job again, thanks to my network. One of my prior bosses left and started working on my current firm. And so I reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a job." And so he just kept me on his radar, right? Until there was an opening and called me up, and I made the world difference. I think sometimes people don't take the time to kind of stay in touch with people, or they make the mistake I try to do, which was kind of microwave things, right? That works sometimes if you're very lucky and the opportunity aligns perfectly with your background. But a lot of times it's just a very competitive space, and people want to work with those they know, and those they know have a good reputation for working well with.
Yeah, it seems like you took the initiative, and then when given the opportunity, you made the most of it by really working and delivering a good product. And these men remembered that. And I think
Yeah.
it's a good lesson for our audience is don't wait for things to happen, make it happen. And then when you get the opportunity, really be docile, listen, soak it in, and work hard. And I think that's what a lot of people want. They want to know when they hire somebody, they're getting the very best person possible. It's very good advice.
One piece of advice that I got in business school for one of the professors was he mentioned, when you're in a studio, because he got interviewed a lot for his job, the camera has a little red dot blinker that says it's on. He would tell us, anytime you're talking to anybody, don't let your guard down. That red blinker's always on. And you never know, you know, what you might be doing and what impression that might cause for other folks, right? And that could be what drives your next opportunity or drives maybe even like meeting your wife. I don't know, right? And so, just being mindful of that, especially more in a professional setting, right? People are always watching.
Yeah, that's very good advice. You just don't know who's filming you or listening to you, and you always got to remain professional and well behaved.
Yeah.
Now, Joel, you seem like a person that's driven. I mean, you went to USC and you did well there, and then you went to Yale. So I'm kind of thinking you're very highly motivated, and probably you probably sometimes I would say push to one extreme of maybe working too hard. Is that true? And if so, how do you kind of like temper that? Because it could spill over into other areas of your life, your family or other responsibilities.
Yeah, Paul, that's probably my main struggle, if I'm just gonna be frank. I realize I do have tendencies to work, to want to overwork, and part of that, which I'm working with spiritual direction, is because of my own personal ego, right? And kind of working on rectifying my intention of why I do work, right? I shouldn't do work just because I want the recognition. I should do work to serve others. From a practical sense, to serve my family. I have, in the intro, you mentioned I have two kids. I have another one coming. My wife and I made the decision that she was going to be a homemaker. She quit her job. It's a very successful job in nonprofit space in October, right? So we gave up that dual income, and it's totally worth the sacrifice, but it also means that I need to really focus on working well and working for them, right? Working for my wife and my kids, right? Eventually, once the gets out of the house, I'm assuming that she'll go back to the workforce. But then the other reason too, as Catholic men, is we can turn our work into prayer, right? And I truly believe that a job well done, right, it means a lot. And it's not so much about the results, right, which I struggle with because a lot of times I'm a little bit of a perfectionist and I think it's about the results. It's more about the love, right, and the effort that we put into it, and there's times, I'll be honest, where I think there's little miracles where, I put a lot of effort, the deadline comes, I know it's not perfect, but then it's received well, right? The work that the delivery was received well. And I know that's not because of me. I know that's part of the work just kind of turning into prayer. So it's the one thing I constantly have to do is, why am I doing this, right? Why am I doing this work? Is it for me? Is it so I can get promoted? Or is it because I want to serve others, right? Serve my family and serve my coworkers. And so something I kind of alluded to this earlier, that there's more work in my roles than hours in the day, right? Because my workday shifts as the day shifts, and there's certain fires we have to address. If I wanted to, I could work all evening and every weekend, right? And don't get me wrong, if work is probably hearing this, and I'll be honest with them, I'm putting in a very solid 10 hours a day. And when there's deadlines, working in the evenings and all that. But I'm trying to put a limit, what we call like living the heroic minute with the laptop, right? Closing the laptop on time so I can go and spend time with my families. When I was single, it was really easy to work longer. And I think maybe it probably was appropriate, right, during that time to kind of put some extra hours, kind of get ahead of my career. But now that I have a family, they need to take precedent. And I travel a lot for work as well. So I need to be mindful of that too, right? That I'm already taking some evenings away from my family. And so I try to be very conscious about closing that laptop on time, and having faith, right? Telling God, look, I gave him my solid 9, 10 hours. Please take care of the rest. And, it's hard because I have a couple other colleagues who are also regional COOs. There's 3 regions in my company. And those guys are single, and they're horse worker. What was the word? They
Workhorses.
yeah, they're workhorses, right? One guy starts every day at 6:30, takes a break to go to the gym, and then works until midnight, right? And I just don't have that time, right? And so going back to your question about focus, I just need to really focus and do as best as I can, but at a certain point, just be detached. And it's hard. And it's hard.
Yeah, it seems you would be better off to have balance, because you cannot live that pace. And you also alluded to spiritual direction. I mean, you have a great background academically. I know you're very smart, but however, no matter how intelligent we are, we have blind spots, and we need others on the outside with objective eyes looking at us and trying to help us. Because I know you love your work and you like to work, but you also have to remember, you have to pull the reins back and say, hold on a second. I've given 10 hours. I need to dedicate the rest of this time to my family, or to my prayer, or to other things that might need your attention, because all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. Well, Joel, as we close, what advice would you give to our audience on how they can improve their daily work performance or develop good traits that their bosses will like to see in them?
I'm going to give probably 3 things. The first one, I think you need to be willing to roll up your sleeves, and I'll expand that in a second. The second one is, do what you say, right? Follow through and kind of deliver and build that reputation. And then the third is just try to be somebody who gets along with people, right? In this work environments, we're always working with others. And there are some personalities that are harder to work with, and those are going to be, the ones that get passed on. And so on the first one about rolling up your sleeves, I've hired multiple people, right? And have had to fire multiple people. And I would say one of the common threads of the people who we could let go or fire are people who feel like they're too good to do certain tasks, right? Or they want to, not do the work and kind of be lazy, right? And kind of push it to other people. Those things you can kind of sniff out real quick. And that's just going to cause problems in terms of people wanting to work with you, in terms of, the team performance and just a morale in general. And so, if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves, you're not willing, like, sometimes to do certain things that may be beneath you, not saying that, all those things are best use of your time, but you're not going to be somebody wants to work with, especially early on in your career. Early on in your career, I think you should say yes to everything, right? Like send the calendar invites, arrange meetings, book conference rooms, maybe once in a while do the coffee run. Those are easy things that, early on in your career you should for sure do. But even right now, right, I still manage my own calendar for the most part. I do have an executive assistant that helps me out, but I do some of that stuff. I take notes in meetings sometimes when it's my turn. Just those kind of little things just really, really make a difference. The second thing on the following through, right? Something I personally don't like is just people who raise their hand and say like, yes, I'll do this by X date, and then they don't do it. All right. One, people depend on you, right? And if you're not dependable, again, you're not gonna be somebody who I would trust, right? Somebody I would want to assign bigger responsibilities to. But the other thing too is it goes back to the reputation, right? Sometimes there's valid reasons why you can't do it. And I would recommend just communicating those to your supervisor or communicating those, this other priority came in place and whatever. But I think there's sometimes people who just showed up in meetings and with no action, you just feel like the time is wasted. And for a lot of us who are really busy, that just starts creating a bad reputation for that person. And then the third thing about just getting along with people, I'm not saying just getting along for the sake of getting along, but work is difficult, right? And the more you can make it pleasant, the more you're gonna get out of yourself, and more you're gonna get out of the rest of the team, right? Things I hate wasting time on is just dealing with a fat personality because I'd rather get stuff done, right? And so, just making conscious, like if you're somebody who has a hard personality or difficult, kind of practice on, keeping your cool, maybe taking a break sometimes, if whatever happens. But like any of us who are probably listening to this, right? If you're striving to be a good Christian, that's something that, we all should be working on, right? How do we become people who get along with others?
Yeah, and summing up, it seems like what you're saying is to be humble, to take initiative, facilitate things, be a good team member. Well, Joel, I want to thank you for your words of wisdom and your time. Thank you for joining us in the Forge today. Discernment isn't a one-time event. It's a daily yes to God's providence. As you navigate your professional growth this week, pray for the courage to follow where He leads. May Mary, Mother of fairest love, be your guide and your protector in the midst of the world. Thank you very much, Joel.
No, thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here.